Well, welcome back to the book of Isaiah. And chapters 1 through 5, as I said yesterday, were kind of a prologue to the book. Chapter 6, we see to the back of that prologue is tacked on Isaiah's commission and call, or call and commission. So I think that's really the front porch of the book of Isaiah. Getting into the house now. We're getting into the main section here. These first 35 chapters, as I talked about, are primarily prophecies of judgment, and we'll see that more and more as we go through these subsequent chapters. Today, in chapter 7, it's part of a kind of a larger group of chapters that is a prediction of really global and universal judgment and deliverance. And then 11 and 12, chapters 11 and 12, when we get to the end of this, kind of opens out from what's happening locally and in the relative near term to what's going to happen internationally and in the longer term later on, verses 11 through 12. But as we get into this first part of the chapter, one of the things that is confusing when we come to the Old Testament in general, and the prophets in particular, is there's all these names and places that we're just not familiar with. So let me try to unscramble this a little bit for you. What's happening in these first two verses is a conspiracy is being reported. And the conspiracy is between Reza and Pekan, and they are conspiring to replace King Ahaz of Judah. So they want to make an alliance and replace him with a character in verse 6 who's called the son of Tabeel. So that is the idea that's going on here. They want to replace the king of Judah with a puppet king that's going to do the work and the bidding of Syria. And this is a threat that's facing them. So Isaiah is going to encourage Ahaz, the king of Judah. So in verse 3, he's told, Isaiah is told to go out basically and meet him as he comes into town. And oh, by the way, when you go out there, take your son with you, Jeshbub. His name means a remnant will return. So he is going out to meet the coming king, a king who's facing this threat of being replaced by a foreign conspiracy, a coup, if you will. And he's being met by Isaiah with a word from the Lord and a flesh and blood assurance that a remnant is going to be preserved. So Isaiah goes out there and he tells him that the northern kingdom, which he calls Ephraim here, that northern kingdom, the kingdom of Ephraim, is going to collapse, and it's going to collapse within 65 years. So this is the proof that the kingly dynasty in the south is going to survive. This is the proof that God provides him, is the collapse of the Assyrian kingdom. Judah is to be watching. Judah is to be learning. We could say generally that prophecy's fulfillment gives us confidence today in what God is going to do. So Isaiah presents this, and then he offers a sign. So, okay, this is going to happen in 65 years, but the Lord wants to offer Ahaz a sign, maybe more immediately, to back up this claim about what's going to happen. And, I love the way the Lord does that. I love the way he is patient with us. He knows our weakness. As Jesus himself said, the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. He knows that we're weak in our flesh and that sometimes we do need a sign. Of course, the sign we have today is all God's word and all the fulfilled prophecy that gives us confidence to what he's going to be doing in the future. But these men didn't have that. So God offers him an immediate sign, and Ahaz, I think in a false sense of piety, declines. He says, no, I don't need a sign. I think what's happening here and we'll see as it develops in the chapter, as you read through it, is that Ahaz has probably already decided how he's going to handle this attempted coup. That he is going to form an alliance with another foreign power, with the Assyrians. The Assyrians are ultimately going to bring down the northern kingdom, carry them off into exile. Now you need to distinguish between the Syrians, who are conspiring to take him off the throne, and the Assyrians, separate empires. So he's going to already decided, I think, in his mind to align himself with the Assyrians. So when God comes and offers him a sign, this is really an example of how God's word hardens the heart of those who are hard. He's already decided on a course of action. He's already decided what he's going to do. Doesn't want a sign from the Lord. His heart is hard. God then intervenes. In verse 14, he says, okay, I'm going to give you a unilateral sign. And this is going to be a sign to Israel that I will not abandon them. He says a son is going to be born to a virgin, and they will call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. There's going to be a miraculous birth. And that miraculous birth is going to be a sign that God hasn't abandoned his people. Of course, if you know the New Testament, in Matthew particularly, in Matthew chapter 1, verse 23 specifically, you'll know that Jesus is that son born of a virgin called Emmanuel, God with us. This is a title, not a name. We hear Emmanuel as a name, and reasonable as that is because it is used as a name, but it's a title here. So this prophecy was for the far distant future. It was for the latter days, as it says in Isaiah chapter 2. So this universal sign is given, and it's fulfilled ultimately in the birth of Jesus. And Jesus' birth itself is a sign that God has not yet abandoned his people, and he will not. So, some personal applications here. Of course, the first one is that God is gracious to us. He gives us lots and lots of reasons to believe his word. Sometimes people talk about faith being a blind leap in the dark, and I think nothing could be further from the truth. The Lord doesn't want us to take a blind leap in the dark. Rather, faith is assessing the data that's in front of us and making a decision that this is true. A commitment to follow the one who's true. And that's what's going on here, is that God is offering him a sign. And as I said yesterday, that there's going to be people, even in the church, who have outward shows of piety and of spirituality, perhaps like Ahaz here, declining a sign, saying, I don't need it. People who are going to have this spiritual patina, but below it is going to be unbelief. And they're going to be in the church, and we need to be careful of people like that. Again, I think Matthew 7:22 is a great example of those who do great things in the name of the Lord, but the Lord never knows them, never knows who they are. You can't hide unbelief in God's word. You can't hide unbelief in what he has said. It's going to be exposed. Finally, in terms of a national sort of application of it, is that no national conspiracy to destroy Israel will succeed. God will supernaturally intervene. Just reading some articles recently about the 67 and 73 wars in Israel and the miraculous events that were associated with the unexpected victory of Israel. And I think, again, that God is never going to allow his people to perish. He's never going to allow the seed of the nation to be wiped from the face of the earth. Even in our day, should Israel be overrun as a nation by the nations around them, God will yet bring them into existence. God will yet bring them into national existence. And we would do wrong as a nation if we refuse to support them, because God will ensure that no conspiracy to bring down his people will succeed. So God bless you, brothers and sisters, as we work our way through Isaiah. I'll meet you in Isaiah chapter 8 tomorrow.